This is just a quick video to give you some preparation for the Unit 1 exam. Chapters 1, 2, and 3 introduce you to some basic concepts regarding what is art and why it has always been a part of humanity. So Chapter 1 asks, what do artists do? And the author used different works of art to share the function of art and artists, and he covered them in these basic concepts. Artists sometimes create places for human purpose, create extraordinary versions of ordinary objects, record and commemorate, give tangible form to the unknown, give tangible form to feelings and ideas, and refresh our vision and help us see the world in new ways. So as you look over the review images, think about the function of that work of art. Both of these works of art are sculptures, but they were created with different reasons in mind. They were created by different cultures and very different time and place for each work. So think about what function they might serve. Does this give form to ideas? Does this help give form to emotions that we may have? Think about that for each of the review images. Chapter 1 introduced one of the most famous artists of the 20th century, Vincent van Gogh. So be sure to read his biography and think about how he used things like color or form or line or shape to express his ideas. At the end of Chapter 1, the author describes the experience of perception and how selective it can be. When we're looking at a work of art, we do not all notice the same thing. So he talks about this idea of perception being very selective. We focus on the information that we need for the task at hand, and we also bring to a work of art our own mood, and we bring to it our own life experiences that affect our interpretation of the work. So, for instance, when you look at the two paintings here, they are full of symbols that we can begin to interpret and try to grasp what the artist is saying. Now, they were made at very different times, but some of the symbols that are in there, we can begin to interpret them, whether it is something from the 1600s or whether it is something from the 1900s. The very contemporary piece by Hodges is more abstract, and so we spend time trying to discover our own associations to the materials that the artist has used and the method of creation that he has used. Think about the terms in the chapter, for instance, vanitas, which is associated with these two works, and it ties into that idea of perception and interpretation. In Chapter 2, the author asks, what is art? And he tries to explain how and why we value art. So these are some of the basic concepts that art is expressed in ways other than monetary value for how we value art. Ideas about art versus craft, or thinking of the artist as genius with very original ideas and inspiration and creativity. This is something that was defined in the Middle Ages. The notion of audience has developed over time. So how we view art has changed as we've added people like historians, art critics, and as we've added places like galleries and museums that we use for experiencing works of art. Art now can come from outsiders, people who are not trained in the traditional way that we think of for training to become an artist. And then also aesthetics, how we define the idea of beauty has changed. So art does not have to be pretty in order for it to have value. When you look over these two images, think about how we would discuss their beauty in very different ways, and how we would value them for very different things that they help us to experience. They're also useful for considering another aspect of the chapter, appearances. So, can you define any work of art that you are given as representational, abstract, or non-representational? Remember those three categories that we did in our homework, and think about how they relate to the review images. Context is another important component that was introduced in this chapter. So when looking over the review images, think about the where, when, and why each image was created. Context is the personal, social, cultural, and historical setting in which a work of art is created and interpreted. The image on the left by Delacroix, this is something that was made in the midst of revolution, and it's full of symbols for the people in their time. It's something that people would have recognized, describing the events that had been taking place in France. The image on the right, this is something that was made before museums, and it was meant to be viewed in a church, not a museum or a palace, but it's also full of universal Christian symbols. So each one of these has its own kind of context that we would use to interpret the meaning. Installation. This is another term that is introduced at the end of the chapter, and this is important in terms of context, because for installation, this means that the artist is really designing the whole environment in which you experience the work of art. So this is a piece by Kara Walker, a contemporary artist, and this, like many installations, is something that was very temporary. The art itself, like the figures that are in the edges of the piece, they're even going to dissolve over the time during the exhibit. So think about the term installation. Be sure you watch the video related to this work of art. And once again, you have something that has symbols from the past and symbols from contemporary events that the artist is using to give meaning to the piece, but the artist is also using this entire environment to give information about the piece and your experience as you enter the work and reflect upon its meaning. For chapter 3, the artist focuses on themes. So you're looking at the sacred realm, politics and social order, stories and histories, looking outward or the here and now, looking inward, our human experience, invention and fantasy, the natural world, and art and art. So these major themes are open to interpretation, and remember that a work can belong to more than one theme. In life, you will not experience art with a label in your textbook, so you should be able to look at a work and consider what theme it might belong to, even if it is not something that we have studied. This chapter introduces a major work by Pablo Picasso, Guernica. So this is something that we've seen and an artist that we will discuss many times over the course of the semester. So think about what this work is about. How many different themes could it belong to? Think about his style. Think about the subject matter. How do they relate? Again, what is so important about themes is that a work of art can belong to more than one. What is important is how you explain your interpretation of that theme. Does the form that an artist uses help to identify the theme? Or do symbols in a work of art help you identify the theme? So think about that again when you're looking across the review images. Think about the form, think about the symbols, and think about what theme you might use to place that work of art in as you try to interpret its meaning. As a final summary, look over your review notes, pay attention to any bold vocabulary words, look over the review images and think about key ideas for each work. Watch the videos posted for the chapters. For the essay questions, you can be clear and thoughtful, answering all parts of the questions, but you do not have to write paragraphs and paragraphs. You have a limited amount of time. It's the same amount of time for my seated courses because they take basically the same exam. So I understand that you do not have hours and hours to complete the essay questions. And lastly, please do not cut and paste. So if you cut and paste from an online resource, you will not be given credit for that answer. Good luck, and take your time to review and prepare before you take the exam.